The white glove came away gray, not dirty gray, not smudged gray, just the faintest whisper of dust barely visible against the cotton, the kind a person would need to hold up to a window just to confirm it was real. Alara Vance held it up anyway, examined it with the quiet precision of a surgeon, then turned to face the woman kneeling on the floor. The maid's name was Priya, 26 years old, 2 years of spotless references from 3 different households. She had shown up that morning with pressed clothes and hopeful eyes, like someone who didn't know where she was walking into. She knew now. The hands were trembling. Not shaking, trembling, that fine, barely there vibration the body produces when a person is working very hard to hold themselves together. The eyes had gone glossy. The chin was doing that thing chins do when someone is fighting tears and losing the fight slowly. Alara said nothing for a long moment. She looked at the glove, then at Priya, then back at the glove. Underside of the third floorboard, Alara said softly. In the east corridor. Priya opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I don't need an explanation, Alara said, peeling the glove off one careful finger at a time. I need a standard and you don't meet it. That was it. Clean, quiet, and completely merciless. By 11 that morning, Priya was gone. By noon, the agency had already received the call, 17 maids in 8 months. Not one had made it past the glove test, the water test, the silence test, or any of the 12 other evaluation rituals Alara had refined over time the way other people refine a recipe. Each test a little sharper than the last, each dismissal a little smoother. The staffing agencies across the city had started passing around a code for the Vance estate, 2 words whispered between coordinators before a file was even opened. The code translated loosely to, "Don't bother." The estate itself sat on 12 acres of immaculate land 20 minutes outside the city. The kind of property that didn't have a gate. It had a boundary, and people understood where that boundary was without being told. The main house was all white stone and floor-to-ceiling glass, with hallways wide enough to echo and rooms designed to feel like money didn't have to announce itself because it simply was. Alara had grown up in those echoes. She had learned early that this world rewarded precision and punished softness. Her father, Richard Vance, had built Vance Shipping into a global empire through exactly that philosophy, and watching him long enough had made her believe it was the only philosophy that worked. You held the standard. You enforced it. Anyone who couldn't meet it was simply not built for this level. The agency sent a new candidate by 2 o'clock. The woman who stepped through the side entrance was not what Alara expected. She was older, somewhere in her mid-60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat, low bun. The hands, folded calmly in front of her, were calloused at the knuckles, not the soft, lotioned hands of someone who performed the idea of work. These hands had actually done it. Her clothes were plain, pressed, and unremarkable, one small bag on the shoulder. And when she came through the doorway, there was none of the wide-eyed adjustment that new staff always showed when they first saw the inside of the estate, that involuntary pause, that moment of recalibration. This woman simply walked in, looked around once, slowly, like she was taking inventory rather than taking it in. Then she stood still. Her name, according to the paperwork, was Martha. Alara watched from the far end of the reception hall, arms crossed, running the first scan. It was always the first 30 seconds that told the most. The way a body carries itself. Whether a person reached for the nearest surface, needing something to anchor to. Whether the smile came too fast, that reflex of someone trying to make themselves agreeable before the room had even decided what to ask of them. Martha did none of it. No reaching. No reflex smile. No scan of the room looking for approval. Just stillness. Not the rigid stillness of nerves being controlled, but something quieter than that. The kind that lives in a person who has long since stopped needing a room to validate them. That was unusual. Alara walked toward her, heels clicking against the stone in the particular rhythm she had spent years perfecting. The rhythm that made people straighten without knowing why, that created a split second of self-doubt in whoever was receiving it. Martha did not straighten. She watched the approach with dark, level eyes and waited until the distance between them was comfortable before she said simply, "Good afternoon." Miss Vance, not ma'am, just good afternoon, offered the same way a person extends a hand, Not reaching, not pulling back, just present. Alara stopped, held the look for a beat longer than comfortable. Read the position requirements, she said. Not a question. Have, Martha said. And the conduct standards. Yes. Alara tilted her head just slightly. Most people who read those standards don't show up anyway. Something moved briefly across Martha's face. Not quite a smile, not quite amusement, just a quiet recognition of what had been said before she answered. Most people aren't me. The words carried no edge, no performance, no attempt to impress. They were simply true, offered without apology, and that was exactly what made them land so strangely in that big, cold, echoing room. Alara studied her for one more moment, then turned and gestured for her to follow, already calculating, already selecting, already deciding which pressure point to press first. 17 maids had come through this house. Every one of them had shattered. This woman, this still, calloused, unbothered woman, believed she was something different. Alara almost smiled. This one, she decided, would be the most satisfying of all. The lily vase went first. It happened on day 3. Alara came through the sitting room with a glass of mineral water and her phone in the other hand, moving at the particular speed of someone who is not actually in a hurry but wants to appear that way. The vase was tall, crystal, filled with fresh white lilies that the estate florist had arranged that same morning. It had been sitting on that side table for 6 years without incident. Alara's elbow caught it on the way past. The crash was spectacular. Water spread across the marble in a wide, flat sheet. Lilies scattered like something broken in a painting. Shards of crystal fanned out in every direction. Alara didn't stop walking. She turned her head just enough to look back at the mess, and then at Martha, who was already coming around the corner from the east hallway with a cloth folded over one arm. There was no gasp, no frozen moment of uncertainty. Martha simply crouched down, began collecting the larger shards by hand, carefully, methodically, and set them in the cloth without a word. She mopped the water. She gathered the lilies. She was back from the utility room with a replacement vase inside of 12 minutes. Not once did she look at Alara. Not once did she say a word. Alara watched from the doorway of the adjacent room, mineral water still in hand, and felt the first thread of irritation pull tight somewhere behind her ribs. Day 6 brought the rug. The estate's back hallway had a hand-woven runner that had been cleaned that morning. Alara had checked it herself. She walked through the garden after the rain deliberately, choosing the muddiest path between the rose beds and the back door. Both boots, full contact. Then straight down the center of the runner, heel to toe, unhurried. Martha was in the kitchen when the sound of the boots stopped. She appeared in the hallway a few minutes later, looked at the trail of mud without any visible change in expression, went and retrieved the scrub bucket and got to work. Somewhere in the middle of it, barely audible, she began to hum. It wasn't a recognizable tune, just a low, steady sound, the kind a person makes when they are comfortable inside their own head and the work in front of them doesn't threaten that comfort. That hum did something to Alara, something she didn't have words for yet. Day 9. The water test. Alara called Martha into the dining room before dinner and told her she required a bottle of Fontaine Blanche still water, a specific French mountain spring variety, 2009 vintage, still in production at the time but discontinued and nearly impossible to source without a dedicated collector's contact. Martha wrote the name down, left the room, was gone for 40 minutes. When she returned, she set a different bottle on the table, a comparable French still water with a similar mineral profile. Next to it, a single folded piece of paper with the name of 3 suppliers who might have the requested vintage in reserve stock, and the estimated wait time for each. No apology. No nervous energy. Just the alternative and the information, offered the way a professional offers a solution. Alara stared at the paper for a long moment, then pushed back from the table and left the room without touching the water. 11 days in and nothing had broken. The plan had always been building towards something bigger. Alara had saved the final test, the one that had never failed because something told her she was going to need it. She retrieved it from the safe in her father's study on the morning of day 12. A sapphire-encrusted watch, face rimmed in gold, the kind of piece that stopped conversations. It had lived in the family for 2 generations. She brought it to the pool terrace just before noon where Martha was wiping down the outdoor table, held it out in one hand. "I need this polished by the time I return," Alara said. "Use the chamois cloth in the lower cabinet, nothing else." Martha reached for it. And that was the moment. Alara shifted her weight forward like someone who had just misjudged a step. The watch left her hand. It arced once in the sunlight, a brief, glittering parabola, and then vanished below the surface of the pool with a clean, small splash. A second later, the current near the filtration intake had drawn it in, and it was gone. The silence that followed was enormous. Alara turned slowly. Her face had already arranged itself into the expression she had prepared for this: wide eyes, controlled regret, the particular kind of stillness that communicates shock without being responsible for it. "You dropped it," she said quietly. "That watch belonged to my grandmother. It's been appraised at $3 million. A pause. "You'll be repaying my father for the rest of your life." The words landed in the air between them and stayed there. Martha stood at the edge of the pool. She did not look down at the water. She did not look panicked. She did not look at Alara with the desperate, cornered expression that 17 women before her had worn in their final moments in this house. She stood perfectly still. And then she did something no one had ever done in this yard, in this house, in all the years of tests and dismissals and broken people walking out of that front gate. She reached behind her back, untied the apron strings, folded the apron once, twice, set it on the arm of the nearest lounge chair, and sat down, not on a service stool, not on the edge of something. She sat in the center of Alara's designer outdoor chair. The one guests used, the one no staff member had ever touched, crossed one knee over the other and looked up. The expression on her face was not anger, it was not fear, it was something that looked impossibly like sorrow. Alara opened her mouth. Nothing came. Martha said, "Sit down, Alara." A request, not quite a command, something quieter than both. The voice of a person who had decided that the performance was over. Alara's legs, to her absolute confusion, obeyed. The older woman waited until the silence between them had settled completely before she spoke again. Her voice was low, unhurried, the kind of voice that had clearly never needed to raise itself to be heard. "Owe you an apology," Martha said. "Not for anything I did here, for not stopping this sooner." Alara stared at her. The afternoon sun was warm on the back of her neck. Somewhere in the garden, a bird was moving through the hedges. "I'm not a maid," Martha said. "I've never been a maid. I'm the majority shareholder of Vance Shipping. I've been your father's silent partner for 30 years. The words reached Alara's ears. She understood each one individually. Together, they refused to arrange themselves into something she could hold. "My name is Martha Osai," the older woman continued. "Your father and I built the Pacific Freight Division together in 1994. I own 42% of the company. I have never cleaned a floor in my professional life, though I'll admit I didn't mind it here." Alara's mouth was open. She closed it, opened it again. "Agency," she managed, "is owned by a holding company," Martha said, "which I control." The garden felt suddenly very large. The estate felt suddenly very far from anything solid. "Your father has been watching you for some time," Martha said, the cadence of her voice never shifting, never rushing. "Not with cameras, with concern. He saw something changing in you, not the standards, not the precision, but the part underneath all of that. The part that stopped seeing the people in front of you as people." Alara felt something tighten in her chest. Not anger, something older than anger. "We made a wager," Martha said. "A simple one. If you could treat the woman placed in your home, whoever she appeared to be, with basic human dignity for 1 month, the company would pass to you as planned. If you couldn't, the inheritance would be redirected. A global literacy fund, fully endowed." The tightening in Alara's chest became something else. A slow, spreading cold. "Every test you ran on me," Martha said, "I was running one on you." Lily vase, the rug, the water, all of it flipped over in Alara's memory. Every moment she had thought she was evaluating Martha, Martha had been sitting quietly on the other side of the scale, watching the weight fall. "Watch," Alara said. The word came out thin. Martha reached into the pocket of her slacks and set a sapphire-encrusted watch on the arm of the chair beside her. Same face, same gold rim, same weight and glitter in the afternoon light. "A replica," Martha said. "Had it made 2 years ago for a different purpose. It's worth maybe $800. She looked at it for a moment, then back at Alara. The real one is in your father's safe where it has always been. Alara looked at the watch. She looked at the pool. She looked at her own hands folded in her lap and had the sudden, vertiginous sensation of seeing them from very far away. You knew, Alara said quietly. The whole time. You stayed, Martha said again, and her voice for the first time carried something that might have been grief. Because I was hoping you'd surprise me. Bird in the hedges had gone quiet. The pool's surface was perfectly still, no evidence of anything dropped or lost or swallowed, just light moving across the water the way light always does, indifferent and beautiful and honest. Alara sat with that for a long moment. 17 people had walked out of this property diminished. She had watched each one go and felt nothing she recognized as wrong. She had called it standards. She had called it excellence. She had called it her father's philosophy, his legacy, the correct way to move through a world that respected only strength. She hadn't called it what it was. Martha stood up, smoothed the front of her slacks, picked up the apron from the chair arm and folded it one final time, setting it on the table like the closing of a chapter. Money can be inherited, Alara, she said. Character cannot. She walked across the terrace without hurrying, paused once at the garden entrance without turning around. Your father still loves you. That part isn't part of any wager. Then she was gone through the garden gate, and the sound of her footsteps faded into the afternoon. Alara did not move for a long time. She sat in the chair and looked at the pool, that flat, still, indifferent water, and saw, faintly, her own reflection staring back from the surface. A young woman, beautifully dressed, surrounded by 12 acres of everything money could build, looking for something in that reflection she could honestly admire. Finding nothing, the sun moved. The light changed. Somewhere in the house behind her, a clock ticked through the silence. And for the first time in a very long time, Alara Vance felt the specific and devastating ache of a person who has just discovered that the life they were so proud of was the very thing that needed to change.